Well, in television, you know, film is a shared experience. We don't do film by ourselves. And so obviously the script is the first part of it, and probably at the beginning of any process, the most important part, because without a good script you don't go any further. But the trick in film is that as you gather elements, as you pull different pieces of the thing together, you get actors, directors, editors, composers, wardrobers, that as you add all of this, set deck people, as you add it all together, you should hopefully be making it stronger and better with each additional element. So that when it's all done, if the script was the best part of the thing, then you've made a mistake. It really should be, your picture should be better than your screenplay. That was always my rule. So I viewed my work in television always as a collaboration. And it was a great time for me because it took me probably about 6 years of writing every day for 5 or 6 hours a day, and after work I had a regular job working for my father, and then I would come home and I would start writing at 5, and my wife would put dinner on at 10, and so I would have 5 hours to write every night, and then I would write a full day on Saturday and a half a day on Sunday. And I did that for like 5 or 6 years without selling anything. And then finally, I got an agent, and I started to get into pitch meetings, and I'm a very good pitch man. I could sell you your own used clothing, I'm very good. So I would get into these offices and I would sell. I would always sell. I never came away without an assignment, but I would also over-prepare. I would go into if I were going in to pitch a show, I would try and come up with 5 or 6 fully worked out stories where I could tell you every scene. Then I would have 5 or 6 what I called springboards, which were a setup and a conclusion. And then I'd have 5 or 6 what ifs. Because I figured, which is just what if this happened, and I had no solution or conclusion. Because I figured my agent was only going to be able to get me into 1 or 2 of these meetings a year, and I better damn well close the deal when I got in there. So I would work for a week or 10 days getting ready for a 45-minute meeting. And I pretty much always scored because I so over-prepared. And actually on one show, I went in and I pitched all my ideas, and I was all over the target and never actually hit. I mean, he would say, well, the executive producer doesn't like stories about psychiatrists, or, we tried that last year, or, we just bought that 2 weeks ago. I mean, I didn't get anything, and I'm closing up my briefcase and getting ready to leave. I've been in there for about an hour and a half with this producer. And he says to me, it was an NBC show called Ironside, starring Raymond Burr, back in '68 or '70 when I was pitching it. And he said, oh, by the way, you have an assignment. And I said, but you didn't like any of my stories. He said, I want to tell you something. I've been doing this job for almost 35 years, all the way back to radio. I did the radio dramas. He said, in all those years, I've never had a writer come in this prepared for a meeting. He said, I got to find out if you can write. So I didn't even score on my stories, but my obvious overperformance and effort to get ready for that meeting, and I wrote him a script and several more after that. And then I was put under contract to Universal, and now I was a writer under contract for a show called Adam 12. I was the kind of the lowest paid guy on the lot, but I was making $600 a week, which back then was a lot of money, and much more than I was getting from my dad. And I was in the Writers Guild of America, and I had a parking place on the lot, and I couldn't believe it. I was like a kid that had gone to heaven, and I started to get successful at Universal. And again, my successes were all shared. I wrote the pilot for the Rockford Files. I wrote the pilot for Beretta. I had a great mentor, executive producer, and co-creator on Rockford, and he executive produced Beretta, and that was Roy Huggins, one of the greats in the early days of television. Roy was, he created Maverick, Run for Your Life, The Fugitive, just a whole bunch of classic 77 Sunset Strip, just a whole bunch of classic early television, and was my teacher and mentor and kind of father in the business through the years that I was at Universal. And then I formed my own studio in '81 and went on from there. But you know, and over the years, over the many years that I was doing it, I created or co-created over 42 primetime network television shows, which is the American record. But I wasn't there, by the way, alone. A lot of those shows wouldn't have gotten on the air had it not been for the help of Roy and the actors that were involved and the pilots and the directors and other writers that helped me and worked with me. It's a very much a shared, but when it comes down to going into a network office and selling, you know, you can't beat me, you know. And then I always had enough talent to write a script that they wanted to punch up, and then we had enough talent here in the studio to, you know, to put the right actors and directors into it and cut it correctly and add the right music from Mike Post. And it was a wonderful run, and I did that until '97, and then I decided to become a author. And I always wanted to write novels from the time I started as a writer. That was sort of my goal, but I got so swept up in television and so outperformed any hope that I would have ever had to be successful. I mean, you know, it never occurred to me that I would have the career that I had in television. And I was sort of overwhelmed by all that success, and so I never got around to writing books. But when I sold my studio in '97, and it was, at the time I sold it, the third largest studio for television in Hollywood. We had 2,000 employees here. It was totally private. My wife and I owned the whole thing. And when I sold that in '95, I was looking for a new gig, and I didn't want to go back and be a hired gun at Universal or Warner Brothers or all the guys that I used to compete with the Cannell studios. So I thought, well, what am I going to do? And under a picture of myself in my senior yearbook in high school, it said ambition author. And I think I'm not sure why I put that there. I think I wanted to be a writer. I think one of the reasons, quite frankly, was I wanted to piss off my English teachers. But I thought, you know what? You don't author screenplays. You got to write a book to be an author. And so I wrote the first book, The Plan, in '97, and it was a national bestseller, and now I've written 13 more. So that's basically my career, and, you know, overly long, I guess, presentation, but that's my career. And somewhere around the time I was at Universal, I already had Rockford and Brett on the air, I think. I maybe even won an Emmy or two by then. And then, at that particular time, my daughter, who was my second born, was having a lot of difficulty in school. And by the way, I was undiagnosed because back when I was in school, they had not isolated this condition. But I'd been reading a little bit about it, and they were getting ready to throw her out of the same private school that threw me out in the 6th grade. And so I went over there, and I begged them not to do that to her. I wanted to get her tested, and she went to a testing institute here in Los Angeles called Frostic, and they did this battery of tests to find out what her learning differences were, and it turned out she was severely dyslexic. And at the time, I took the test too because I knew by then that I was probably a dyslexic as well. And it turned out we were both really very dyslexic. And by the way, this often is passed down from a parent to a child. Of my 4 children, 2 of them have this condition, to the point where it's been difficult for them to graduate through college, but they've all made it, so I'm very pleased. My graduating GPA, by the way, from the University of Oregon was a 2.0, which, as you know, is a C-. But I got out, got the sheepskin. So my daughter had this problem, and I moved her out of that school, which was not very forgiving toward kids with learning differences, and moved her into another school, which was also a private school, a very good one, but much more user-friendly for children with conditions like this. And she graduated there and graduated college, and now is one of the best directors for primetime television in Hollywood. Doesn't work for me because I don't do television anymore, but she's doing ERs and a lot of stuff for Jerry Bruckheimer. I'm really proud of her.